My guest today is Karith Foster, who is a diversity engagement specialist, humorist, and author whose signature programs are impacting lives at academic institutions, organizations, and corporations across America in a time when humor, understanding, acceptance, and respect are so desperately needed. She builds a true connection to her audiences, providing individuals with not only information about diversity, but simple ways to promote inclusion in their daily lives. Karith leaves each of her audiences feeling inspired and encouraged to commit to a journey to find mutual respect, acceptance, and a greater sense of belonging. Welcome to my show, Karith.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to this. We know that we have a mutual agent that we work with, and when he told me about you, my original thought was, oh, it'd be great to have a comic on my show. But the more I read about you, I was like, okay, this woman is incredible. She has done so many things, and I love how you bring humor as part of your platform to really inspire and help people to be motivated to who they truly can become.
Thank you. Well, my belief is if you can laugh at something, you can get through it.
Yeah.
And actually, the motto of the nonprofit I started, Frame, is laugh, think, grow. Because I truly believe, especially when you're speaking about taboo subjects, subjects that can make people uncomfortable, put them on the offense or the defense, using humor can neutralize that space so that you can have the real conversations you need to, because we still have to talk and communicate. Because if we shut that down, there's no moving forward. There's no progress that can happen. And that stifles a lot, as far as, where we're going as society. There are a lot of things we don't want to talk about, but not talking about it doesn't make it go away.
Exactly. Well, I really like that because, like you said, humor itself, I mean, that is we all experience that. We all want humor. We all want something. So to create, like you said, to create that neutral territory, to have people experience the same emotion, then yes, it does create a joined platform. Especially now, nowadays with the world is just so divisive in so many things, and it's so unfortunate. And it's, and really one thing about my show with Lifeology is I really try and help people say we all experience the same type of emotion. The way that life rolls out or the experiences that we have may be different, but our emotions and how we feel are all the same. And that's really how Lifeology was created, because someone who may look different than me or someone who may have different experiences than me, if I have a certain thought like, oh, they're different, but the truth is we're not, because we all feel the same thing.
And that's exactly the messaging behind. So I coined the phrase inversity, right?
Oh,
I actually trademarked the word
nice.
Because, when I work in the realm of diversity and inclusion, which is what my life path has led me to do, what I realized is the way we were addressing D&I, as they call it, or DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, while I really, truly want to believe it's been well-intentioned, it's just been done poorly. And it's been done to the effects of creating more division, more polarization, because you're making people either pick a side or putting them into a category.
It's very black and white.
Exactly. You're either a victim or you're a villain. And who wants to be either of those, right? So the idea behind diversity is that it's still a nod to acknowledging the differences and respecting our experiences, that, we come from different places, we look differently, we love differently, we vote differently. But it's more about what do we have in common? How can we be truly inclusive of one another? But most importantly, and to your point, how can we be introspective, right? Meaning understanding your value, your worth, your connection to humanity. Because if you can see that in yourself, then you can see it in someone else.
And I think that's absolutely beautiful. First off, I love that word. That's brilliantly done. But it's true in the respect of, let me back up. In psychology, we have what's called a dialectic. It's a fancy word to basically say two polarized things can exist at the same time, but be mutually exclusive, but mutually connected. And so I really like what you're saying as well, is people can have completely different viewpoints and understanding, and they're both 100% true, but they still exist in the same plane. And learning how to do that in a harmonious way is so important.
Absolutely. And what better way than to do it with laughter and humor? Because, I see these programs that have been done for years and decades. And listen, it's a multi-billion-dollar-year business, okay? Let's not kid ourselves. But who wants to be lectured at? Who wants to be talked down to? Who wants to be made to feel guilty? Or they've caused the situation? Nobody. But if you can use humor to not just lighten the mood, you can use it to almost like a Trojan horse, kind of get in there and get people relaxed enough to be like, I never thought about it like that before. That's a really good way of putting it. Oh, maybe I wasn't thinking about this the right way. Maybe I can change how I see myself or someone else.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
I was watching your TEDx talk. I think it was at Lincoln Center, was it? When you were talking about the stereotypes. And you were talking about your parents, beautiful pictures of them, first off, when you were saying how they were trying to find homes, or trying to find a place to live. And they couldn't because, for one, they didn't sound Black. And then when they would show up, then all of a sudden people would treat them a certain way and different. How did their life experience and all the, I guess, all the stereotypes that they experienced, how did that impact you to be able to have your platform today?
So, it's funny. I was an adult before I realized it was a year after my parents got married that they actually got to live together. Because that story you're referring to, the TEDx talk, it was 1967. My father was a captain in the Air Force. And they had just gotten married, and they got to the base, but there wasn't any room on the base. So when my dad moved my mom out there, so they went, searching for houses or apartments off base, and because they sounded much like I do, they would call, and everyone would be like, "Oh yeah, come on over," and then they'd show up, and they're these Black, brown people, at Montana, 1967. Okay, but the thing about my parents, what's so beautiful about them is that, they didn't grow up with like a chip on their shoulder. They grew up understanding that, my mom used to go to South Carolina as a child and see the segregated water fountains. My dad took my mom to Myrtle Beach for her 70th birthday because when she was a little kid, they weren't allowed to go there.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
So they grew up in that world.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful?
That is beautiful.
But they grew up in that world, but it wasn't something that they put on us as, we had to go through this. Life is, people are evil. This was what we had to go through. So please understand that you may face the same bias, but you don't have to fall into that category. You don't have to be someone who that's your only drive, right? And so I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood in the very beginning. I was born in Denver. And literally, the people next to us were white. The people on the other side were Mexican. The people catty corner was a mixed race couple. People across the street were Black. The people in the cul-de-sac were Chinese. Like it was like real life Sesame Street.
That's funny.
I didn't know that. Like I didn't even realize there was anything different about me until we moved to Texas, where I was like the only Black person in my class.
I saw all your pictures growing up.
That was from second grade all the way through my freshman year of college. I was the only Black person in my dorm at the school I attended. And that was my normal. And what I realized is that for everybody, every one of us, we have our version of what is normal, right? And then at some point, that prism of normal has to shift and change. Whether that normal was being in a really diverse area and then going to some place where there's nobody who looks like you, or being the only one, the only Jewish person, the only gay person, the only person of color, and then you're with a group of people that's that's why I gravitated toward Washington D.C. and New York, because I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more than what I was exposed to.
And that's an amazing thing, especially coming from a place of such diversity, and then all of a sudden being the only person who may look different. And when I was listening to you as well, I could hear. There's so many life lessons that come along with that, and that can be, like you said, someone has a different religion, or someone looks different, or whatever it may be. But I guess I keep coming back to this. I love your platform in the respect of. I was watching you also on Fox News, and I've seen you on all these different things, and I love how you have this ability to transcend, once again, stereotypes, but just the ability to help people say that may be different than you or may look different than you, but you find that platform and they hear it and they're able to listen to it. So I don't know if that's just a natural gift that you have, which I'm assuming it is, and obviously a craft that you've honed for so long. But it was such a beautiful thing, and even looking at some of your audiences, there was not much diversity in some of your audiences, but they were there to listen to you and to hear what you had to say. Right. And, just like I said in the intro, you inspire them to say, wow, I didn't realize that. So kudos to you for that. So thank you for opening up that door for all of us who may be different to be able to have a platform just like yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot. And it is by design. What's funny is you talk about like my childhood, like I did struggle being the only one, feeling like I used to call it being caught between two worlds, being told I wasn't Black enough by my Black friends, sometimes even family, right? But then I wasn't white, so I didn't really fall in. So where did I belong? Where did I fit? And the more I speak around the country, the more I speak at schools, I'm learning like I'm not the only person who felt that way. And so to be able to be this leader who got through it and got to the other side is really helpful and inspirational. But I also like, there are certain people who are like, how could you go on Fox News? Because they're very much opposed to the messaging sometimes. And my point is that it's not, I'm going on there as myself. My only agenda is to bring people together. I am not political. My organization is not partisan. I'm actually very much an independent.
I am as well.
But the idea is, if we don't expose people to each other, then how do we possibly expect to have unity?
Yes. Yeah, because there needs to be that understanding of, there's that partisan aspect when it comes to politics, but just the understanding, it allows for our country to grow even more and be much more well-balanced as opposed to completely polarized versions of it. And then all these disparity and all these different types of, unfortunately, hatred that can be populated and all the propaganda that comes along with it. Speaking of that, you were on, was it the Don Imus show?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
Is it too early to drink?
I know, right? That's hysterical. Because I mean,
just coffee. It's just
I'm
coffee.
just kidding. But when I was reading that, I was like, oh, okay. How did this play out? And so why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory on that, and then obviously what happened when you made your choice. But
it's funny. I was just writing about this.
Yeah.
I didn't really know much about him. I knew my grandmother had listened to him. Like that's how old the man was. But it wasn't until he made news, like was in the headlines for the disparaging remarks he made about the Rutgers women's basketball team. I refer to it now as Nappygate. But it was a situation where it was, and like as somebody who is an advocate for free speech, as someone who is a comic, like I completely understand how it happened. Like I truly do. When you are on the air, you're a comedian, you're trying to be funny, and there's this terminology called riffing, right? Where you're just like pulling stuff and trying to, and it usually works better when you're in an audience, but you don't know what's going to work and what doesn't. The problem was he really, and this isn't defending him, but he did not know the language he was using. He called, just for reference, he called the women nappy-headed hoes, which is not something you say about Black women. You don't talk about their hair if you know what's good for you. And you don't call, these were basically children. They were in college. They're young women who did not ask for, being put in a spotlight like that. And to be called a hoe, that's just, it just wasn't, it wasn't appropriate. Beyond it, like, and that's an understatement.
Exactly. Yeah, of course.
The problem was he was doing it trying to be funny. He was actually, if you listen, parodying his producer. And if you knew the man, I think he had 3 friends total, none of whom were Black. So he didn't have anybody who could be like, hey, let me put you in check.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not okay. Right? So it was the perfect combination of a really inappropriate thing to say, a really slow news day, and it just, it blew up. And I will never forget when I heard it on the news. It was the day of my uncle's funeral. And I just remember thinking, it was so prophetic, God, I should have been there. I should have been there. And not 6 months later, I get a call from a guy who I'd done comedy for years prior. Hey, Karith, you interested in a radio TV opportunity? And I was like, of course. By the way, it's with Don Imus. I'm like, the Don Imus? And I had to really, really have a bit of a come to Jesus meeting with myself. Like, is this something I want to take on? Will I be considered a sellout? Right, for joining forces with one of the most reviled men in media? Or is this an opportunity to do what I was kind of talking about earlier, to show another side, to be the anti-stereotype of what we see of Black women in the media, to represent a group of underrepresented people in a really positive manner. And when I went to speak with him and we met, and he said he wanted to, come back on the air, have a national dialogue about race in America. He was very contrite and sorry for what he said. And I did believe that. I really did. Because I don't think he was intentional with it. I really don't. Not that made it hurt those young women any less. Yeah. But I do think you have to take into consider the intention behind people and what they say and do. And so I said yes. And I was on air with him for 2 to 3 years of my contract. And what's interesting is what he did was a faux pas, absolutely. But there was another layer to him. And unfortunately, I think the best way to describe it is that he was someone who was just damaged. You know, he was, well, to the day he died. I think you always will be an alcoholic and a drug addict if you never seek help. Did he
Yeah.
stop drinking and doing drugs? Absolutely. But he himself, you know, said he was a dry drunk, which is someone who never went through the 12 steps,
Yeah.
who never did any type of recovery. He just stopped cold turkey. So what we were dealing with was someone who had the manic episodes of an addict. And I'd never been exposed to anything like that in any of my relationships. And so it was very foreign for me. And to see, you know, what's interesting is when people have addictions, you know this as a psychologist, you know, it's almost like they're whatever they're doing, they're hurting themselves. And if it can't, like, you can only put so much inward, and then it goes outward. And what I saw was a lot of it going outward. And I mean, I saw treatment of human beings that I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't seen it firsthand. And then I was on the receiving end of it.
Wow.
Which was hard.
Yeah. Well, how did well, if I can stop for 1 second, how did
Yeah.
you, every time you would see that and you would feel that and you'd be on the receiving end of that, what was your self-talk like? How did you get through that?
Well, I thought it was my fault in the beginning because this was so new for me.
Yeah.
I'd
And it's
never
his
been-
show and he's the expert.
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
get
Well,
that.
he wasn't just the expert. He was the king.
Yeah,
He
that's
was the
true.
president. Like, he was writing my checks.
Oh.
And then the weird part, and I know what's interesting after talking about this to more people is, you know, I'm not the only person who's gone through this either. Like, there was no HR in this situation. You know what I mean? There was nobody I could go to and say, hey, because everybody was like, well, that's just who he is. He's just a jerk. You just move on. And I'm like, but how is this acceptable? How is that? Like, to me, it was just so inhumane. And yet people put up with it. But then you see now, like, the larger stories of, like, the Harvey Weinsteins, right? People who knew what this person did. And it was acceptable because he made money. He was the cash cow, you know, or the golden goose. And that to me was very disappointing. And the thing is, it's not always on that level. Like, I'm sure there are people who are in janitorial jobs who have bosses that are abusive. But because they need that job, they can't say anything. They can't do anything. And you know, for a lot of people, like for me, for the longest time I thought it was my fault. I thought, you know, maybe if I just do this differently, like I went into victimhood, like mindset. If I just say this or do this, then I'll make it better. And what was worse is there were really good days.
See,
There
that,
were
that
good
is,
days,
that's
you
the
know?
cycle of, cycle of abuse. Yeah, of course.
But I didn't know that because I didn't grow up with that. And so I left, like I said, 2 years into the 3 years of my contract, on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I remember thinking I'm either going to Bellevue or Bali.
Wow.
And I was fortunate enough to have, because I'm like, if I'm spending that kind of money, I'm going someplace pretty. So I went to Bali.
That's better than Bellevue, that's for sure.
It was way better than Bellevue. And I had to regroup, and I had to get myself back. And I kind of just immersed myself in this spirituality and taking care of Karith and repairing myself. And so much came out of that. And I lecture every year at Stanford Graduate Business School on a course on reputation management. And I talk about how I went in to help him redeem and repair his reputation, but ultimately had to save mine because of my affiliation. And
that's a good point. Yeah.
I get asked every year, so would you, if you had to do it all over again, would you? And the answer is yes, I would. Would I take it as personally? Absolutely not.
Sure.
Absolutely not. But I was so young. I didn't know any better. But it was a great, almost rite of passage, right? Because here's the thing. I think when you go through something that is very difficult in life, when you have a struggle, when you have, and it doesn't always have to be abuse, and hopefully it isn't. But, you know, I think when we have challenges, like, that builds us up.
Yes,
and that strengthens us. And I think, you know, to think that you should go through life without any challenges, without anything that, like, rocks your boat, like, that's just that's a desperate misconception of what life is.
Well, you know, one of the things that I always say is things that are either a stumbling block or they're a stepping stone. When every opportunity arises, we have the self-responsibility to say, I don't like this, I don't appreciate it, I'm not okay with it, but what do I do with that? So once we have that aha moment to say, these are the facts as they are, what do I do? And in that moment, that's where that internal strength comes. That's where that resilience comes. That's where that ability to say, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I'm going to do something. And in that, that is my focus. And so as you have that focus, it starts to say, well, maybe this opportunity opens up or this opens up. And pretty soon, when you use it as that launch pad, it really catapults you into the focus and into the direction that your life should go or will go.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. And, and it was because of that experience and having gone through that gave me a new sense of conscious empathy is what I call it. Because I say I want people to care, right? And that stands for conscious empathy, active listening, responsible reactions, and environmental awareness.
I love that.
And it wasn't long after I left IMUS that I was just kind of recovering. And that was a good 2-year process, no lie. But there was an incident that happened at Rutgers University. Ironically, it was another Rutgers affiliation, and a young man by the name of Tyler Clementi took his life by jumping off the George Washington Bridge. After being outed by his roommate and some classmates, they secretly recorded him in an intimate situation. And
I've heard of that. I did hear about that.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Yes.
It was horrible. And I'm someone I'm literally a friend to all. Like, I have so many friends who just run the gamut from really right wing, conservatives to, transgender, liberal. That's just who I am. I love you for who you are.
That's
and
beautiful.
It just broke my heart that anybody could feel that alone or ostracized for who they were. And I remember thinking, I have to do something about this. And that was the inception. That was the start of Stereotype 101, which is the programming that I take, that I started taking to schools and universities, but realized that there was a larger audience at hand. There was corporate America. And eventually I'd like to go backwards and start even younger. Because as someone who has small kids, I don't think you can start soon enough with the message of inclusion and diversity.
Yeah. Well, Karith Foster, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on my show today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join with us, to inspire us, and to leave us with a message that we are all the same and we all have a beautiful, wonderful story to tell. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much.